Hi folks, my name's Steve Sharman. I'm a research fellow here at the University of East London, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about some of the work I do here. But first, tell you a little bit about my journey, about how I got here. My journey with psychology started actually here at UEL. I did the undergraduate degree here about 10 years ago. Then I went to UCL to do a master's, then I went to Cambridge to do my PhD, and then via a couple of other postdoc positions, I am now back here at UEL. On a research fellowship from the Society for the Study of Addiction to look at gambling behaviour in virtual reality. So that's kind of where I came from, why I'm here. So now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about some of the really exciting research that we're doing here at UEL looking at gambling. Okay, so there's a whole load of different types of gambling available in the UK. We have things like horses, dogs, sports, scratch cards, lotteries, adult gaming centres, casinos. There's a really wide range available. We've got one of the most permissive legislative environments in the world. And with smartphones, pretty much you can gamble on pretty much anything, anytime. Gambling is really widely available. We know that around just under 70% of the adult population gamble, which means that of the adults in the UK, well over half have gambled in the past 12 months, which shows that it's something that a lot of people in the UK do. For some people, gambling can become something of a problem, and it can become a very serious problem. We tend to kind of call those gamblers disordered gamblers, and disordered gamblers account for around 1% of the population in the UK, or just under 1%, which may not seem like very much, but actually that's just the tip of the iceberg. And then we have this whole kind of subclinical group that are experiencing harm, and that can be between another 4 and 7% of the population, depending on kind of which report you read. So you're looking at up to another 2 million people affected by gambling-related harm. So you can see that gambling is something that's quite a serious issue. So we really need to understand some of the fundamentals that drive that behaviour. So why do people gamble? And specifically, what keeps gamblers coming back for more? Now, we know that most gamblers lose. In fact, the entire gambling industry is built on that exact premise. If everyone won, then the industry wouldn't exist. So more people lose than win. And the gambling industry, therefore, has to make sure that losing is fun, because why would you do something that is not fun a lot? So the gambling industry has to make losing fun, and one of the ways that that's done is through different structural characteristics within different types of gambling. Now, I should say at this point, structural characteristics we know they're important to the development and maintenance of gambling behaviours and gambling problems, but they work in a complex way with a whole host of other factors, so social factors, environmental factors. They all play massive parts, and structural characteristics are one of those things that can influence how gambling behaviour develops. Structural characteristics are things like losses disguised as wins, where you might maybe stake £10 on a roulette spin, for example, and win 5, and it feels like you've won something, but actually you've won less than you originally staked. So that counts. That's objectively a loss. You have the illusion of control, which is where, for example, if you went into and bought a lottery ticket and you picked numbers that were particularly kind of special to you, and then you bought another line where you just had a lucky dip, you become much more attached to the numbers that you've chosen, because you feel like you have some semblance of control over that particular line. Speed of play is also important, so we know that games with faster outcome resolution are potentially more harmful. And we also sometimes see reinforcement only of positive outcomes. So if you're playing a slot machine, you might get kind of lights and sounds flashing when you win, but if you lose, nothing happens. So there's no reinforcement of non-win events, only positive outcome events. But the event that I'm going to talk about today, the structural characteristic I'd like to talk about today, and what the main part of my research focuses on at the moment, is something called near misses. Okay, so what is a near miss? A near miss is when you lose, but you feel like you've come really close to winning. So, for example, if you bet on a horse to win and it just comes second, or if you bet on a certain player to score the first goal and they miss a penalty or hit the post, that's you feel like you're close to winning, even though actually you've lost. In a slot machine context, these panels here can show what the different outcome types are. So, in this particular simulation, let's say across that win line across the middle, in panel A, that's a win because 2 grapes have matched. So you've got 2 icons that have stopped that match, so that wins. On panel B, you've got to match the grapes. So that second set of grapes in the right-hand column have just stopped just before the pay line. So that's what we call a near miss before the pay line. Panel C, you can see those grapes have lined up, but then they've just dropped 1 click below. That's what we call a near miss after the pay line. And then panel D, the grapes are miles away. You're not even close to winning on that particular spin. So why near miss is important? So we know that they drive persistent gambling, which is persistent gambling is when people gamble more. So we know that if you have a particular game that has near misses and the exact same game doesn't, it's not exactly the same then. So you have a game with near misses and without near misses. People will play the one with near misses for longer. We also know that near misses create this kind of strange bivalent response where they're really aversive, they're really unpleasant. They don't make you feel good when you experience a near miss, but at the same time, they increase motivation to keep gambling. So it's a particular outcome type that people don't like, but it makes you do the behaviour more. So we think it's kind of important to differentiate between those 2 near miss types before and after the pay line, because previous research has shown that it's those near misses before the pay line that kind of drive that increased motivation to keep gambling, whereas it's those misses after the pay line that are particularly frustrating and particularly aversive. We also know that near misses tend to occur on slot machines more at a greater rate than they would by chance, which suggests that the game designers and the gambling industry do understand the psychological properties of the near miss, and then are able to use those to kind of entice people into carry on gambling on a particular form of gambling. Okay, so a really important paper in this field was this paper by Kasanoff and Sharp back in 2001, where they got a load of students to play a particular slot machine game with near misses occurring on different frequencies of trials. Some were 15%, some were 30%, some were 45%. And what we saw was when near misses occurred on 30% of trials, that was what drove persistence the most. So when near misses occur on about a third of trials, that's what drives people to carry on gambling the most. Now, this is a huge paper in our field for gambling researchers. There's a lot of people who research near misses cite this paper a lot. We all put 30% near misses in 30% of our trials in our experimental design. However, this kind of lab study, it lacked what we call ecological validity. It wasn't in a massive sample size. It was a very important, well-run study, but we don't know how much that applies to the real world. So what we're going to try and do is combine all the kind of the realism of a naturalistic experiment, but also retain some of all of the experimental control you get in a lab experiment by using virtual reality to better understand gambling behaviours. So why do we want to use virtual reality? And I should just say at this point, if you are still watching, still paying attention, and you don't like spiders, you should probably close your eyes a little bit at this next slide, because there's a spider. Okay, so why do we use virtual reality? We know that VR has been used to examine a number of disorders in the past, such as fears of driving, fears of flying, arachnophobia, and post-traumatic stress disorder. We know it's immersive, it's interactive, it's ecologically valid, and it can be a safe environment to conduct research and treatment in. So what we want to do is better understand gambling behaviour using VR. So assuming this lovely bit works, what I'd like to show you now is the 3 experimental conditions we use to actually use to run this study. So here you have our basic control condition. Now this is a much more traditional kind of experimental design where you have the participant in a testing room in a psychology department pressing buttons on a keyboard and watching the reel spin on a PC screen. This kind of setup gives us a lot of control over lots of variables. We know exactly what's happening. But as you can see, this doesn't really look or feel like real gambling. That experience for that participant is that they're doing a psychology study rather than that they're gambling. So we wanted to move some of these tasks into virtual environments. And we're using 2 different virtual environments. The first one is using something called computer-generated virtual reality. Okay. So here you can see the participant starts off sitting at a fruit machine or a fruit machine case. There's some buttons to press, but inside that headset she's in a casino, and that's what you're going to see on this screen here. So this is what she can see, and bear in mind, because the headset's on, it's fully immersive. So you can see there's the banks of fruit machines, there's roulette tables, craps tables, there's even, when you look at this in more detail, you can see the shadows of the glasses of wine and the smoke in the lights. It's very realistic. So then we superimpose our slot machine over that existing fruit machine frame that's there. And then you can see that that becomes a much more kind of realistic environment for that gambling behavior to be performed in. So the second type of virtual reality is really, really exciting. This is what we call 360 VR, which is where you have real life footage of a real life venue or environment shot with a 360-degree camera that we can then manipulate to add and take things away. So here you can see we have added our slot machine simulation to the machine over the top of the existing shot of the machine. But then when the participant looks around, you can see that she's in a real gambling venue, which I think I'm right in saying there's a bowling alley in Essex somewhere. But as you can see, again, this is fully immersive because she's got the headset on. You put some earphones on, so you have all the sounds as well, potentially. And as you can see, that's a very different experience than just sitting in a room pressing buttons on a keyboard. So it's much more ecologically valid than the kind of the regular testing environment. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you with presenting loads of data right now, although that is extremely interesting. I'm just going to tell you what we want to do with this research. So we want to advance methodology in gambling research using some of the technology that's available to us at UEL. So we have some brilliant VR equipment. So we're able to move some of those really important key studies from the conventional testing state into virtual reality, which increases the ecological validity and advances the methodology. We want this research to be able to be used to inform and influence policy making. Researchers from UEL, particularly within addictive behaviours, within gambling, we present to the government. Sometimes we submit reports to government calls for evidence. So we are in a position where some of the research we're generating is actually able to inform and influence policy making. And finally, we want to explore the possibility of using virtual reality for treatment for behavioural addictions. Okay, so thank you for watching. If you got all the way to the end, a few thank yous to the people I work with, particularly Leon, who does all the coding and all the programming, and the funders for the Society for the Study of Addiction. I hope that gives you a bit of a flavour of what we do here at UEL. And thank you very much for listening, and I hope you stay safe.